you, Rod. Thank you so much, Deanna. Just double checking you can hear me. I'm going to say that's a yes. Yeah, it's been an interesting morning. It appears that we are Australian government. We are allowed to use Zoom, and we use Zoom through our browser, but we're not allowed to download the app. And for some reason, this one is not letting us in unless you're going through the app. So I am coming to you from my mobile phone. Deanna has the presentation from her desktop. So this is hopefully the most effective way that we can come to you at the moment. And Rod and Deanna have sent me through quite a bit of information as well ahead of time, which has really helped me guide what today's discussion is. And in particular, the focus will be both on COVID-19 and also ASQA reform. And that's because the impact of COVID-19 saw many RTOs review and reflect the way that they operate, or even what it is that they delivered. And during that time, our role was, and it definitely still is, to work with providers to support them as they make their decisions on how to operate, while still maintaining the integrity of the training products being delivered to ensure that we still get quality outcomes for students. But for us as well, we've had quite a lot of invested time into the ASQA reform, which is our own review and reflection on how we operate to ensure confidence in the vet sector. And while the impacts of this you'll have seen, particularly in the education and guidance that we've provided really over the last year, going forward, you will see a change in our compliance function to a focus of a culture of self-assurance. And we'll also talk about this today because I see a lot of questions that came through ahead of time, particularly related to compliance. I do want to, noting how delayed we are, I want to leave as much time as we can for questions as well, because I think that's where the real value comes in. So I'll make sure that I reduce some of the things that I was planning on talking about so we've got time for questions. Deanna, could you go to the next slide? So this year has seen us focused on supporting providers during the pandemic by listening to the issues you're facing and responding to reducing regulatory burden wherever possible and providing greater levels of education and guidance. We are now 9 months in and we continue to maintain a flexible approach to regulating the sector. So some of the things that we have offered, we've postponed a range of regulatory activities in consultation with providers, and we are still doing this. Having said that, we are still applying a risk-based approach and conducting audits where providers have indicated that they are able to proceed. We've allowed providers to place their registration on hold, which is effectively putting it into hibernation until the situation improves, instead of the provider having to withdraw their registration. So it allows the provider just to cease everything that they're doing without having to contact us to withdraw and then apply again in the future. We have extended the transition or teach out periods of more than 200 training products. We've extended some registration periods. We've supported providers in their assumption planning, including conducting a webinar on this topic. And there is quite a lot of information on our website. You can also watch the recording of that webinar. And we have implemented the Commonwealth Government's policy of waiving or reimbursing fees and charges for vet providers and accredited course owners. Now, one of the things we've done is we've enabled providers to notify us of any temporary changes to their operations just through a simple online form. And just for some stats, as at the 1st of October, of those providers who had advised us of changes, of which there is about 1,200 providers, 53% had closed campuses but had continued to deliver online. 36% had kept campuses open but were offering online delivery. 7% had closed one or more campuses but had kept others open, and 4% had closed campuses and ceased all delivery, with 51 providers placing their registration on hold. So that actually is really quite a good amount of data and a range of data, just so you can start to see how the vet sector as a whole is starting to develop and evolve and how they're managing during COVID. Now, a significant issue remains the health and social distancing challenges of delivering face-to-face training and also gaining access to workplaces to facilitate work placements and assessment in a number of jurisdictions. Not surprisingly, this was a particular issue for providers in Victoria. Many students, including those that come from a low socioeconomic background or that come from regional and rural areas, have had difficulty in accessing online learning as a result of either a lack of sufficient internet connectivity or the need to share a single computer within a household, particularly if you've also got kids studying from home as well. Feedback also suggests that some providers have had difficulty transitioning online as a result of shortage of appropriately qualified or experienced trainers and assessors, and the challenges that can be posed by working with students in an online environment, particularly if they haven't had that experience before. Now, this is where we come in from a risk assessment perspective to help providers as they face those challenges. Next slide, please, Diana. And for us, our risk assessment practices are to protect the sector. So ASQA's risk-based approach, recognises that while we cannot mitigate every risk, we can direct our focus to identify and treat the most significant risks facing the Australian vet and international education sectors. So as a result of COVID, we did receive a lot of data and information. Feedback that I mentioned on the previous slide. We also got complaints. We received a lot of infoline inquiries. We sought information through the ASQA, and we received a number of applications. We used this information to identify 3 emerging areas of growth. And from this, we've identified potential issues that providers should be aware of, what the impact of these issues could be if the problem arises, and then guidance to assist in mitigating these problems. And we did this for a few reasons. From a purely audit perspective, it will give you the indication on the types of risks that we're looking at. So this is the reasons why we might still conduct an audit, and also if we are auditing your provider, the sorts of areas that we would focus on. From an education and guidance perspective, it also tells you where we're working to support you. But from a provider perspective, there's real value in sharing this information with you because it helps with your own risk management practices. So just because an item is listed as a regulatory priority doesn't mean that it is bad at all. These are simply areas that you need to concentrate on to maintain quality in vet. And this is where your webinar topic, Learning from COVID, Finding the Opportunities, comes into play. These are risk areas, they're areas of growth, but they're also opportunities. So how you manage those opportunities, how you establish yourself to deliver quality will impact your operations going forward. So you'll see on this slide some information in red. We've got some website links. I encourage you to visit those web pages because this provides quite a lot more information about what the risks are and how we're treating them. The website, which is COVID-19, gives you all of our general information of where we're up to in supporting for COVID-19. Immediately below that, it says rising to the challenges of a changed world. That is where those 3 risk areas listed on this page are discussed in further. And below that as well, you'll see that there is an additional page to do with distance learning, which I'll talk about as well. So of these 3 areas of growth, one of them being scope expansion. So that is where providers are changing training products for delivery. It is still crucial to make this expansion after being informed by industry expectations and with a commitment to deliver quality vet outcomes for students. To help rebuild the economy, people need jobs and they do need to be skilled for those jobs. This is one of the reasons why there are quite a lot of new funding opportunities. So as a reminder, if you are applying to deliver a new training product, you do need to be fully resourced for that product. So if you are switching to a totally new industry area that you haven't done before, consider if you have the physical resources as well as the staff capability to be able to deliver those courses. The second one is to do with distance learning, and that encompasses both online learning and also other distance delivery. Now, earlier this year, we did publish a dedicated website on distance delivery, and that's that bottom comment in red. We've updated this to include stakeholder insights and have also conducted a webinar of which there is a recording located on this page. The web page breaks down distance delivery in terms of the student journey, as distance delivery isn't just about training or assessment, but it's also about the marketing practices that you do, the student support, completions, and record keeping. The feedback with registration indicated that quite a number of RTOs have switched to incorporating some types of distance delivery. This is good. Please don't feel that you need to immediately, if you're adapting to online, you don't immediately need to switch to the latest technology. Use any changes as a method of continuous improvement and start small. So if you feel that you do want to start to adapt some online practices, just try different things. Zoom is a really good example of a way that you can engage with your students without actually having to go out and face-to-face to see them. Still seek feedback from your trainers, your employers, and your students as you try new things. Think about how you can improve and then continue to make those changes. That's what continuous improvement is. There are many different types of online learning in all forms of engagement, and you have to choose what works for you and your students and your training products. So some training products work quite well where you give people the ability to spend time on their own to develop their learning. Other training products work better where you've got more of an engaging process where people can ask questions as they go. Most training products work well where you use a combination of the two. So you give time to adult learners in particular to read and to learn and to practice, and then you come together to talk. Be aware that student support is incredibly important, particularly if people haven't traditionally learned in this way before, and you will find that you'll need to maintain more frequent contact with students, particularly right at the beginning, just because it's a different environment to face-to-face. But support for your trainers and assessors is also important. So you could have trainers and assessors who have been in the industry for decades, who are excellent trainers and assessors in a face-to-face environment, but they haven't experienced teaching in a distance delivery environment. Give them the professional development to help develop their skills as well. Now, going forward, one of ASQA's immediate priorities is to place greater focus on online learning, including investigating how we can best support providers to deliver quality training and assessment. We will do this through our strategic review, which was part of our regulatory strategy. And the third one is practical assessment. So this is in regards to using a workplace for assessment purposes. So how an RTO provides training is up to the RTO on the proviso that it is suitable for the learner cohort, that the amount and the type of training allows a student to learn and practice the competency requirements prior to assessment, and that it gives a learner access to all the learning resources, facilities, and equipment that they need. So training is the process an RTO uses to facilitate learning and the acquisition of competencies. And some RTOs do use workplaces to assist in training. Where we talk about practical assessment in a workplace, we are referring exclusively to the assessment requirements in a unit of competency. So these are the things that the student must be able to show that they can do using the resources that they have in the context identified for the number of times or hours that are required. So a unit of competency can list certain assessment requirements, such as specifying the minimum amount of work hours to be done, or a volume, or a number of times. It can require skills to be demonstrated in the workplace, or it could say it could be done in simulation, but it specifies certain resource requirements that are not readily able to be accessed outside of a workplace. Guidance on the page, that asqa.gov.au/distance learning, relates to these assessment requirements and identifies 2 potential issues to be managed. But work placement and practical assessment has been a real area of concern, and not just within ASQA. So yesterday you will have seen the AISC Emergency Response Subcommittee released an updated statement on existing flexibilities. The AISC has been working really hard with industry and other bodies to try and manage, to try and identify how to manage practical assessment as best possible, particularly in COVID. There's a lot of information on their website. There's communique updates. They have included some principles, which are the guiding principles that they're all working to try and find resolutions. I believe they announced on Friday that they had sent some recommendations off to the skills ministers, and they've encouraged IRCs to develop guidance materials. One of the things that was announced yesterday is regarding existing flexibilities. So that is, they've identified what the top 20 qualifications are that are currently being delivered. Of those qualifications, a number of currently being delivered where there is work placement, a number of those qualifications don't actually require mandatory work placement. They do allow a level of simulation. So the AISC has released a statement about that, and launched by ASQA about 20 minutes ago, we have now released a new page about practical assessment. So a news item has just gone out if you go on the ASQA website, which talks about practical assessment and work placement, and it gives some examples and some top tips. So that is brand new, completely just launched. The next slide, Diana, and I apologise, I'm going through this so quickly. I'll go through this very, very quickly to do with the reform, but I will talk about one part in particular, which is about the changing audit practices. So the rapid review started more than 12 months ago for us. In April this year, a report was released about the rapid review, and that link that again is in red goes to the report if you would like to read it. We are underway with implementing our reform, and it's been a real focus for us this year. So the main things that we're working on is strengthening our approach to engaging with the sector. We have made quite a few governance changes. So for example, I'm sitting in a position that only started in July this year. The big thing that I think has a real interest for everybody is we've made some improvements to our audit practice. So this includes changes that came into effect in August this year about the way we collect, record and analyse evidence, the way we draft our audit reports so that they are easier to read, less technical, hopefully more fluid, and the way that we deal with minor issues, which we're referring to as minor deficiencies, and also the way we engage with during the audit process. Now, you should start to see improvements in that area there. In 2021, we will be implementing more improvements to our audit methodology, which will provide for a much greater focus on assessment of provider self-assurance. It will see performance described in terms of compliance and non-compliance, so we're not just focusing on non-compliance areas only. And it will introduce a process for supporting providers to return to compliance where appropriate. So what that means is some of the comments that you made ahead of the presentation spoke about compliance or the burden of compliance. I appreciate that some of you are going to be managing compliance obligations in many areas, particularly if you have contractual arrangements with other government agencies to access funding. For our reform and also everything that we do, we are only talking about the regulatory requirements that ASQA regulates. So that is the NBR Act, the standards for RTOs, the ESOS Act, the National Code, the ELICOS standards, and all of the other requirements that sit behind those. We're here to ensure confidence in the integrity of national qualifications issued by providers. We want a culture of compliance, self-assurance, and continuous improvement. And I'm just going to read this quote to you because it's a really good quote. Our aim is to minimise the need for enforcement by encouraging organisations to understand the values behind the law and change their behaviour accordingly. Not because they get caught out by a regulator, but because they understand why the law is there and what its objectives are. So really, that's a really good quote. Understanding the values behind the law, not doing something because you might get caught out, but doing something because you understand why the law is there and what the objectives are. And that really is a focus for us. And you'll start to see some of the changes that we're implementing is also for us around that. So one of the things I mentioned is to do with minor deficiencies, and that is where something is identified that is not systemic, it's likely an accident, there's no impact on students whatsoever, it's just a mistake. We're not going to sweat the small stuff. Those sorts of things won't be identified as a non-compliance. They will be recorded in the report as a, hey, we've found this, it's a minor deficiency, but we're fully trusting RTOs that they have the ability to fix those sorts of things and implement practices that the accidents don't happen going forward. The other thing from next year, when we move to testing providers' systems and processes, we will be focusing on sustained compliance, not, hey, we're coming to audit you today to check that you're compliant today, because that's a big pressure, and it's also not the important part. Continuous improvement, our focus is on continuous improvement and quality outcomes for students. So if you are subject to an audit from mid next year, if there are non-compliances, what we're going to be doing is working with you to return to and sustain compliance going forward. And that's the big important part. We want you to remain compliant because we want you to have those quality outcomes for students. There will always be circumstances and there will always be an incredibly minuscule amount of providers who are actively trying not to be compliant. That will be a different process. But we really appreciate that 99.99% of RTOs are really trying to do the best that they can, and that is our focus. And just to the next slide, because I'll just really quickly talk about self-assurance, because this is going to be the main focus over the next few years. It's not something that's going to immediately happen. I won't talk too much about this because I found out yesterday afternoon some new information should be released on ASQA's website very, very soon. There will be upcoming webinars on our self-assurance, so I encourage you to access our website, register for the updates, and then you'll be informed when they are available. But the big part, when we talk about self-assurance, we're referring to how providers manage their operations to ensure a focus on quality, continuous improvement, and ongoing compliance. So when you are effectively self-assuring, you have systems and processes in place to critically examine your performance and your outcomes on an ongoing basis in order to identify ways to continue to improve. And I'll go through some things here. So we have sought feedback through a consultation paper from providers, which was released in August, and a summary of these responses will be sent out very soon, and that is about self-assurance and how RTOs are already self-assuring themselves. We have established a sector working group, which convened for the first time in October. We have conducted one webinar already on the topic of self-assurance, and you can go to our website and watch that one. And then, as I said, there'll be more things coming up in the very near future. This includes some information about changes to the annual declaration of compliance, which isn't until next year, but we're starting to get organised for that one. So very quickly, I'll say before we move on to questions, there's a lot that's happening. We're undertaking a lot of consultations and engagement. And as I said, if you haven't already subscribed to ASTA Updates or subscribe to get the current information, I recommend that you go onto our website where you can pre-register, and when these things come up, you'll immediately receive an email. Now that is it for me. So it goes straight onto the questions page.